frazzle. Treading water that they drowning. My head on the swivel. Yeah. It's only really my surroundings.
Hello and welcome to episode 238 of the Smash Accept podcast. I'm your host, Michael Royer. You can find me on Twitter at Dynasty Dad FF. My main man, Snoog, is in Las Vegas with Austin Eckler. He's kicking it with him. Nobody I'd rather kick it with than my man, Zoltan. Dynasty Zoltan, it's been a while since we've chopped it up. Excited to see what's new with you and start talking about startup strategy.
Yeah, me too, man. I mean, Tom Brady invited me down to Cancun, but I figured I'd stay here just so I could kick it with you, talk some startups. I got my priorities in order.
Right. I mean, you got to weigh it out. He's hanging out with Austin Eckler. I get to chop it up with you. To me, it's the same kind of thing, you know? So right now we're in that fun time of season. Yeah, we're in that fun time of season where it's startup season. Everybody, we got past our rookie drafts. Now we start to do what I think are much more challenging and drafts when we're talking about adding the rookies already in there rather than, I really enjoy startup season when it's like there's more strategy when I'm thinking about who I'm taking at 103. Do I want 103 or this player? Now it's rookie player right there on the board, and it becomes a little bit more interesting how do you go about telling people when they're getting into startups, do they start them before the NFL draft? Should they do it during? Should they do it now? How do you prefer to do it? Because I low-key like the numbers where I'm drafting 106, 107 because it's a different thing. Everything's going to be there where now it's like, okay, do I want Udunze? Do I want Bowers? Do I want McCarthy? Talk to me a little bit about the difference you see and when people should be starting their startup season.
Yeah, it depends. I think the best time if you want to get the most value immediately and if you're trying to win a league, which obviously should be your goal from the startup, I love doing it before the rookie draft, doing it in February or March, even before some of the rookie hype is kicked in. Because 108 was going in the 7th round back then.
Yes.
Even 112 was going in the 8th round. It's once you get to the draft, not only with rookie hype, but especially in a draft class like this where there's such strict tiers for the rookie class, these guys end up getting bumped up once we get past the actual rookie draft. So if I want to maximize my chance of winning a league, that's when I want to do it. But right now is a pretty good time to draft, especially if you're trying to go for some win now players and go for more of an immediate win build where we're obviously going to talk about the different strategies you can pursue. But if that's the one you want to pursue, now is not a bad time to do it because there are some real heavy veteran fallers going on right now. Like Travis Kelce's going in the 7th round of some half-tight and premium drafts, things like that. And that's going to change as people get into the redraft mindset in August and people are pulling up their redraft rankings, stuff like that. But for now, that's where the value is. But I'm honestly happy drafting anytime because you got to be flexible and take whatever the draft gives you.
Yeah, that's a great point as far as the veterans right now. I mean, in my last draft, I got TJ Hawkinson in the 7th round because people are like, oh, he's washed. And you're like, no, dude, by the time the season rolls around, which is going to be sooner than later, he's going to be out there, ready to roll. So, I'm excited to start talking about strategy. We've all talked about it in the past where you and I have done 1-year punts. That's the first thing I want to talk about. I was able to in Smash 13. I got 9 first. I just kept moving back. But that seems to be something that becomes more and more difficult. You and I, have done a ton of that in the past. How do you go about, how do you talk to people where they're like, Dad, I want to start a 1-year punt. And you say, it doesn't always work in draft. You know what I mean? You have to go in it with an open mindset of what pick do you have? Who's moving up? It's one of the biggest questions I get in our Patreon. And we talk a lot about startups is, how do you know when to zig, when to zag, when to work those kind of things? And it's a very difficult question. I know in the past, you and I, we're going to talk a lot of nuts and bolts, but how do you go about with your mindset? Do you go in and say, well, this is the type of draft that I'm looking to get. I'm at the 107. I think this guy falls, but maybe I want to move back. Do I move up? How do you start out the entire process? Let's say you're starting with the 108. What do you do with that process once you get your draft pick?
For sure. I mean, I would say, first of all, and I do want to ask you a question about derby drafts in a little bit and talk through that. But as far as what I'm going in with, my goal is always to get the most value. Whatever whatever I think that is, and everyone's welcome, obviously, to their own player evaluations and draft evaluations. But my goal is always to have the most value. I don't care if I'm winning now, if I'm doing a 1-year punt. I don't care if I draft 1 quarterback, 0 quarterbacks, or 6 quarterbacks in the startup. I just want to be in a position where you can have the most value. And honestly, if you're agnostic to things like age, to things like position, it makes you easier to trade with once you pass the startup, because you got something for everyone. You have Derrick Henry, and you have, a Dunze, and you have a Baker Mayfield for someone's QB3. Like, you have a lot more flexibility in that way. So I like to address it, walk into a draft without any expectations. Obviously, I have certain ranges of the draft that I'm certainly targeting, and obviously we'll get into that. But for the most part, I tend to look towards moving back, acquiring future first, just because I found over time that is the route to the most value. But sometimes that's just not available. Like, I'm in a lot of higher money leagues now where you have to pay for trading a future first. Not a lot of people are willing to drop $500 or $1,000 to make a trade to move up 6 slots in a startup the way that you might in a $25 league. So I've had to even adjust my approach for some big money leagues just for that reason as well. But I'm still going in with the main focus of just getting as much value at all costs.
I love that, because when I'm talking to people, they're saying, hey, I really need a running back here. It's May. You don't need a running back. You need the most value on the board. And then, you'll get the question back, well, I would much rather take Austin Eckler here than, Kirk Cousins. No, you wouldn't. Yeah. Like, there's no need to do that right now when you can get a guy like, you can give up Kirk Cousins and get Austin Eckler plus once we get into the season, or, move into that kind of range where you don't have to take those specific players. One thing I've been doing lately, and, is when I get my draft slot, I start to write out what I want from my top 10 picks. So I'll say, what? I have the 104. This is what I want to start to try to fill out my team, start to fill out my rosters. I know the 104s, at this point, it's either going to be CJ Stroud or Jalen Hurts. So what do I want to do with that pick? And if I move back to 110, what does that look like? And I'll actually write out a chart. And I'll say, I'm at the 1-4, and that's what I was at Smash 15. I moved from 1-4 to 110 and got a 25 first because I moved from Stroud to Anthony Richardson. And then I was like, okay, now I'm going to massage the board here a little bit. Now I got this. Then I moved from 110 to 202 for Justin Herbert and added another pick, moving up from the 5th round, which I think is very monotonous. It's very flat, to that 3rd round, which I think is a tier where it's like, these are those areas I want to move into. And people are like, well, that takes a lot more work. We have it. I know you have it. I know I have it. Our startup strategies, our startup rankings, where you can start to look at it and say, this is that area I want to be in. I want to start moving my fists into the 3rd. I want to do something that, I've kind of adapted it from learning from you and talking with you over the years, is I want 10, 12, 13 picks inside my top 10 rounds, because we start 10 players. If I got 13 starters, I'm ready to go, and I did that in Smash Except 11 back in the day, and I just kept moving up, and everybody's like, yeah, but, you don't have any first-round guys. But I had Breece Hall in the 2nd, I had Kyler Murray in the 2nd, I had Amon-Ra in the 2nd, and now all of a sudden you're like, look at the way this roster looks. Now it's a spot where I have tons of value, I have tons of assets to move around, and ended up winning that league. So, that's the interesting thing for me. That's what I enjoy doing, is just trying to create a formula, work through, and then trade back whenever I can, because you get into a spot, there's 7 picks, and I got 8 players I want. Let's trade back. You know what I mean? You come up here, you take whoever your favorite is. I'm going to move to the back of that tier.
Exactly. And that's the key that I found both to rookie drafting and startup drafting. It's don't be picky and always try to draft at the end of tiers. And sometimes it'll have you making trades that other people think look ridiculous. Like I, for instance, just moved back from like the 708 to the 808. And all I got for that was a move up from the late 10th to the early 9th, right? Like it's not that big of a move up. Usually a value wise, I wouldn't make that trade, but I had 13 guys on my board all in the same tier. So I'm not going to go ahead and take, I don't know, Ricky Pearsall at the top of that in the late 7th when I could go get Adonai Mitchell in the early 9th, and it's this exact same thing, again, in my opinion. So I completely agree, trading back to the tiers, and that's how you end up moving up. And I like that you mentioned kind of that top 9, top 10 rounds, because after really like really the like middle of the 10th round, it just drops off a cliff where unless you're going for, a veteran running back who are a little bit underpriced, you're all the way into, your Troy Franklins, your, Gene Smiths, your Devin Singletaries by the time you get to round 11. So like you said, if you can move back in round 1, round 2, maybe even more than once, like this startup that I just did, I had the 102, I moved back to the 109, and then I moved back to the 204. And the result of that is I have 11 picks between the 2nd and the 9th round, and I have 2 extra future firsts. That's how you're able to build up enough equity just from the startup that you can be flexible. And I could say, all right, I could draft A.J. Brown then instead of Garrett Wilson because I want to be win now. Or when I get to the 7th round, I can say, hey, Jordan Addison fell. I don't care that I already have 5 receivers. I'm going to take the value because I have all these other extra picks to be able to supplement my team elsewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think what I've actually done in my last 3 drafts is I don't even own a 12th, 13th, or 14th round pick. I've been taking those, and every single time I try to make one of these trades. So I know we're going to go over a bunch of first round trades. Those are always the sexiest ones. But sometimes you trade from the 3rd to the 4th and get a 2nd round pick. And next year, I always just say, you know what, upgrade my 12th to an 11th and we got a deal. You know what I mean? Because they want to move up. And so many times I'm hearing people say, but Dad, this is their offer. They want to move up. You don't have to be the one to settle. Like, all the power is in your court. Just say, hey, dude, move my 15th to a 13th and we got a done deal. 9 times out of 10, that's going to happen. And then you keep doing those small wins over the course of a draft. And I'll do it in the beginning. I'll start working my 15 to a 14, then my 14 to a 13. Next thing you know, all those little wins get you into 12, 13 spots in that top 10. Now, all of a sudden, in the 10th round, I'm taking Joe Mixon, who I can trade to someone else. You know what I mean? Or I'm taking a guy that is going to, Joe Mixon goes a little bit earlier than that right now. But you understand the principle where I have another startable asset where someone else is going to be hungry for that, and just keep closing that window.
And you can afford, there's a QB run going on in the early 7th and people are trying to reach for Baker Mayfield. You can now afford to sell your early 7th straight up for a future first, which is a great deal for you. And you can do that because you've already stacked up enough value. You can afford in the 9th or 10th round to take Michael Penix or Justin Fields, who aren't going to be playing for you at least week 1 because you have all this extra value. So I completely agree. Try to get your work done early. Try to, like you said, move up those mid-teens pick into as close to the single digits as you can. And one thing I found that I really like is, rather than, all right, I'm moving back from the 2nd to the 3rd, give me an 11th round pick. People aren't going to do that. People weirdly don't like giving up 2 picks for 1 pick in a start. I don't personally understand that at all. I'm totally comfortable doing that if the price is right. But just say, all right, give me back, instead of giving me your 11th, then give me your 10th and I'll give you a 19th. A 19th is literally useless, right? This doesn't matter, but it's a way to make it look like a 2 for 2 and make it say, you're not giving me, a potential starter, a potential flex player. You're just moving back, right? You'll find someone great in the 19th round, I'm sure.
There's so many gems in the 19th. We're going to start cleaning up with those guys. He goes every year in that range. Mm-hmm. So before we start talking about, the real meat and potatoes of this whole thing, you talked about the Kentucky Derby, and this is something that I do in all of my Smash Accept leagues. I know you do it as well, where the Kentucky Derby goes, instead of, whatever you use as a tool, I usually use Fantasy Nerds, where they have, they'll just post whatever your draft order is. And a Kentucky Derby, instead of just saying, okay, this guy got the first pick, he gets the first overall pick, we add a little bit of strategy in there where, what pick do you want? You pick that spot for you, and I think it adds a little bit of element. So the 101, let's say he thinks that top tier is 3 guys, then he says, I want the 103, and if it gets into third round reversal, which really has become very popular, then a lot of people want that 112, so that way when it comes back to 301, they can draft Dak Prescott or Brock Purdy or someone that falls in that area. I've always been on the team of, I want 101 and 102 above everything else because I know I can trade back. And I've made tons of trades in Smash Accept 13. I traded from the 101 to the 105, added a 25 first, moved my 6th to a 3rd, which ended up being, I gave up Mahomes and Hawkinson. I got Stroud, Purdy, and a 1st. You know what I mean? Like, that's just how you insulate and do those kind of things. And I think 101 and 102 to me are still my top priority. And then it gets a little bit trickier. So I want to hear your opinion there, because I know we've talked about it in the past. When you do that third round reversal, what's that third? I'm personally still in that 3 through 6 range, and then I moved to 12. But I was interested to see where you're at, because everyone's like, well, the 112 is such an advantage. And you start to run out of the quarterbacks. Herbert might fall there. Anthony Richardson might fall there, and you get a nice 201, because right now I have 18 guys who I think are a cut above everything else. That's kind of my cutoff. But then you get to that third round, you get that boost. So talk to me a little bit about the Derby.
I mean, I do love the turn, don't get me wrong. And if I was in a league, let's say you're doing a fast startup draft, 30-second clock, no trades, I could see myself taking, it is savage. And I've only done that once. It was wild. But in that case, I would maybe think about taking the 11 or 12, but is that it is just not worth it regardless of the year. Even though this year, like you said, I like being in the top half of round 2. First of all, there's not a big gap between the beginning of round 3 and the end of round 3, which is the main benefit you're getting from the reversal. But the more important thing, like you said, is you're always able to trade back. So this last Derby draft that I did, the 12, 11, 10, and 9 all went before the 102. I had the 6th pick in the Derby, and I got the 102. I was then able to trade from the 102 to the 109. A guy who picked that slot, the 109, above the 102. I made that trade. We swapped first and second, so we basically undid what that was, and I got his 25 first. I don't even think I got great value for that trade necessarily. However, just by picking the 102, I've already set myself up with more value than you would by getting in the end of the draft, because someone's always going to try to move up. It gets a little bit trickier when deciding 5 or 6, because Burrow and Lamar are very close when you get in that range. But on the other end, with the 207 and the 208 are very close as well. So even then, I'll always take the earlier one, because someone else might think that Burrow's way better than Lamar, and they might trade up and give you a premium to get to the 5 instead of the 6. So I'm almost always going to take the earlier one. When it gets down to 9 versus 12, if those were the 2 left, maybe then I'd start considering 12. But in general, the earlier in the draft is better. And then just be vigilant. Hit up literally every single person in your league and say, hey, you interested in this? If they say no, send them an offer anyways. If they say yes, make them send you one.
And a lot of people think they know before it even happens. In Smash Accept 15, I won 12th in the Derby, last spot. I got the 104. Right. So everybody was like, for some reason, didn't want the 104. And we got to an area where, Jalen Hurts went 103, because everybody knows I'm an Eagles fan. Now CJ Stroud's there. So I flipped CJ Stroud, the 104 and the 504, which ended up being Stroud and Metcalf, for the 202, the 301, and the 25 first, which ended up being Justin Herbert, Dak Prescott in the first. You know what I mean? So it's use that. Everyone in your rookie draft, everyone in your startup draft, they get so excited and they want to move up. Zoltan and I have made a habit out of this. We've made podcasts out of this, plenty of money off of this, just playing off the patience, right? $1 tomorrow is worth, you get that extra dollar on top of there. We're always building out towards the future. And if you can play off other people being overly excited, being overly eager, you can end up winning your startups very easily. It's just a matter of being patient.
Yep, that's how you end up picking at the bottom of tiers. That's how you end up getting, Kyler Murray or Justin Herbert at the 205 instead of Anthony Richardson at the 109, right? And then you get all that free value. So in the rookie draft season, I'm done with all but 2 of my rookie drafts right now. I made 112 trades in those drafts. 14 of them were not really about moving up or moving down. It was mostly for vets. So not including those, I got 98 trades. 84 of those 98 were moving down, and 12 of the 14 where I moved up were for Bucky Irving. So basically always move down. It's just a way to accrue value. It's pretty much just the best approach to go about things. Again, there are exceptions if you're able to get crazy value for a guy like I moved up once from the 106 because Jaden Daniels fell there to get Caleb Williams. But in general, you're going to be trying to move back.
Yeah, I'm with you. A majority of mine were that way as well. And I really love what you said about tiers before, because I've posted that a majority of my draft picks have been Brock Bowers and JJ McCarthy. And everybody's like, oh, those are your 2 favorite players. Those are my 2 favorite values. Yep. They have fallen. And, we were ahead of the curve. We were trading to get into the top 7 or 8 for 8 months now. You know what I mean? We were trying to move those picks up. And now it's like, okay, I'm going to take Brock Bowers here. I'm going to take JJ McCarthy here rather than trade up and try to get those other guys. Or I'm going to take my pick at 105 and I'm going to move back from 105 to 108 and add whatever that is. Whether that's moving from the third to the mid-second. Now all of a sudden I get, Blake Corum and Brock Bowers instead of Rome Odunze, and I'm fine with that. And that's that same principle we're trying to talk about here with startups. So for me, and I want to talk a little bit, we'll talk rankings. We'll kind of, I know I want to definitely give you an opportunity to plug your Patreon as well, because it's fantastic. You did your rookie guide, which is, a phenomenal piece of work. So, I mean, before we move into that, why don't you tell everybody where they can find your work? And we always save that towards the end, and I feel like no one listens to the last 30 seconds. So I want to give you the floor here, brother.
I certainly don't. I usually skip that. So thank you. Appreciate it. Dynasty Zoltan FF on Twitter. You can find my website, which I first created probably 3-4 months ago, converted over from Patreon to that website at dynastyzoltan.com. Subscribe, got all the usual stuff, rankings and stuff. My rookie guide was, 200 pages of very, very detailed scouting reports, film breakdowns, a lot of statistical breakdowns as well in there. And I'll have my startup strategy guide coming out probably sometime in mid-June. So that's going to be going over. I'm writing up 12 different ways to approach a startup draft, different team strategies to do, different ways to address it from different positions. It's going to be a lot of fun. So good time to join. Check it out, dynastyzoltan.com.
And that rookie guide was like, for us in fantasy football, was 50 Shades of Grey for, your 40-year-old woman. Like for us, that was awesome. And in our Patreon right now, we're just putting them in rooms where you can have discussion groups and you can have different strategies from every section. And we want to make sure we are giving you the best possible scenario so you guys can come into your rookie drafts. And that's why we have Zoltan on to talk it up here. So for me, I want to talk real quick. What is the first pick that you would consider a non-quarterback in today's landscape? So let's talk 12 team. I want to say, because there's a big difference. We say 10 team, then it's a little bit different. I'm moving Jefferson or Lamb or Chase, whoever that is for you, up into that area. But we're talking standard 12 team. I really don't like leaving the first round without a quarterback or moving myself into, my biggest thing is I've kind of worked into a scenario where my formula is in the first 4 picks, I want 2 quarterbacks, an elite wide receiver, and one of those stud tight ends. That's how I start with my first 4 rounds. But what is the first non-quarterback that you would take, and how early would you take it?
I agree with you. It's ideal because, you're going to have 11 quarterbacks come off the board in those first 18 picks that you're talking about, right? So if you are in, let's say, the middle of the first round at the 105 or 106, and you take Justin Jefferson or CeeDee Lamb, let's say, by the time it gets to you in the second round, Kyler and Love and Herbert might be gone. And then you get to the third round and you might have Purdy and Prescott gone. And then are you reaching for Tua? Are you reaching for Goff in the fourth round? Are you just punting quarterback? And then you have to go for a 1-year punt, but there's no good quarterbacks in next year's draft. And then you got to overpay for one in a trade. So I completely agree with you. It is very difficult to build a team without reaching at least one quarterback in the first round. Again, unless you're at the turn where you're at pick 11 or 12 and you can say, all right, I know Herbert or Kyler are going to fall to pick 13 or 14, so I'm going to take my favorite wide receiver here. But typically, to answer your original question, there are 7 quarterbacks that I would take over my first wide receiver. Justin Jefferson's my first wide receiver. I can see an argument for, Lamb and Chase. I just think Jefferson's a superior player. And as you are, I'm a fan of JJ McCarthy. So when it comes down to like that level of player, I'm going to take a guy in Jefferson who I just think is the superior player. But I would take Caleb Williams over him, who is my QB7, just because I don't want to be leaving the first 18 picks without a quarterback. And that's what you're in danger of doing if you don't take one early.
Yeah, and that's I've been debating, right? I mean, I think the top 6 is pretty chalk. I still think 101 and 102 with Allen and Mahomes separate themselves from the herd. Jalen Hurts is now in that area. Jalen, Stroud, Lamar, Burrow, depending on how you do it. If it's a 4-point passing league, I prefer Hurts. If it's 6 points, I prefer Stroud. But I'm generally trying to move out of that area where I can. But I want to have a quarterback. And that's where you get into the tricky thing of, I've had Caleb Williams as my 107, 108. And now, there is those elite, we keep talking about foundational assets, and there are 12 foundational quarterbacks to me. I want to make sure I get one of those. there are deeper in the draft. You can get foundational wide receivers. You can get wide receivers that are going to be benchmarks to your team in that area. I debate back and forth a little bit. Like I tell everybody when it comes to a startup, I want the quarterback. If you came to me after the startup and I have my two quarterbacks and you say, hey, you know what? Would you do Jefferson for Caleb Williams? Then I would do it. If my team's in the right situation, I value Justin Jefferson more than Caleb Williams, but not in a startup when I'm starting out. And I know I say that to people and they're like, well, Dad, that makes no sense. But I want to see what quarterbacks I have. And this is an area where the positional scarcity of quarterback from 12 to 16 is okay. Once you get past 16, people are like, well, I'll just get Goff. I'll get Cousins. I'll get Stafford. I'll get Rodgers. The longevity of that position just went down. Your biggest asset to trade are always the quarterbacks. They're always going to be there. And that's why in rookie drafts for me, I was like, people said they want to take Marvin over Caleb. I can't see it. Justin Jefferson is Marvin Harrison's ceiling, and he goes at 107. Caleb's already going at 107. You know what I mean? So you're already in that area where we know what we're getting there. And I love to just talking strategy with that because people just think that they are two of the same thing. You say the value is the same and you rank this guy higher, but when you're doing a startup, you got to have the quarterbacks.
Yeah, I mean, all you got to do is look into, the sixth round where you're either reaching on Baker Mayfield or you can take, George Pickens. Like that's the decision you're going to be making later on in the draft, or the fifth round where like basically no one, like there are no quarterbacks going after JJ McCarthy and Drake May come off the board. And in my experience, those guys are coming off the board really in the mid fourth. So it's really difficult to get a quarterback unless you're taking him in the startup. And unlike other positions where, all right, I'll take Cooper Kupp in the 10th, right? Mm-hmm. I'll go and I'll take Brian Robinson or James Conner in the 11th. You don't have that option at quarterback, right? Like, yes, Aaron Rodgers goes there, but you're literally getting 1 year of Aaron Rodgers. And then you're not winning a title with Derek Carr or Russell Wilson as your QB2. So you really, while you can obviously win a title with a guy like James Conner or even a Devin Singletary as your RB2 or RB3 in the flex. So I really want to get those two QBs early, at least one, because you can always supplement your QB2. If you don't have one of the top 15 QBs, you are just not winning your league.
Yeah, and if you have those guys, the amount of trade assets that you have that you can extrapolate, or, extract multiple picks from. A guy like, let's say you're debating between Joe Burrow and Justin Jefferson. So Joe Burrow goes down. You can get a Jordan Love plus still. You can get Kyler plus. You can go down and you can start to get those guys and replenish. Sometimes at the wide receiver position, it becomes a little bit more difficult. And once you get down to that 8, 9, 10, then I start to say, all right, you know what? Now we're debating between you have Jefferson there, you have Lamb there, and then you get to Kyler Murray, Anthony Richardson, Justin Herbert. So how do you go about the latter end of your first? Because I think this is where you really can start to make your money, is that late end of the first. Everybody knows who the top 6 are going to be. That's pretty chalk. But 7 through 12 starts to get that area where it's like, now people are going to want to trade up, but you still want to get to that area. So how do you treat 108 through 112?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I'm definitely leaning towards trading back into either the early second or even the later second and looking to get even a more significant return on top of that. But in general, I still want to stick with the quarterbacks. I mean, I would take Justin Jefferson over Anthony Richardson, for instance. I would probably take, CeeDee Lamb and Jamar Chase over Jordan Love. But in general, I'm still going to lean on the quarterbacks there. Bijan Robinson obviously comes into play as well. But I'm going to lean on the quarterbacks because it's just so hard to find a replacement for one of those guys elsewhere if you're in a 12-team Superflex league. The exception that I am making is a guy like Anthony Richardson and Jordan Love, who both of whom I like. I think are good players with a lot of fantasy upside. Their floor is a little shaky for me. And I'm worried a little bit about taking a player like that in the first round of a startup draft or Jordan Love in the early second, just given the fact that I think they have a shaky floor. So in that case, I would lean like I'm taking ARSB over Jordan Love. I'm taking, I said, Chase and Lamb over Anthony Richardson. But in general, I'll lean towards the quarterbacks there as well.
Yeah, I like that a lot. The one thing that I've been trying to do is when I'm moving back, I'm trying to get, if I'm moving back from 101 to 104, I'm trying to get a late first and an early second. Because like I said, or even a late first or early second, and then that 301. I think
Yeah.
Dak Prescott is literally the cheat code in when it comes to Superflex because he falls to 301, and if he was 27, he'd be 201. Like everyone just acts like he's done. It's almost like he's like the AJ Brown at the wide receiver position. Is they're in that area. Everyone wants to talk about age. They want those young guys, and that's great to go get. Your guy that's 23 years old. But AJ Brown's just 26, turning 27. Dak is 30, and you're going to get 4 or 5 QB1 seasons from Dak. He's literally, for me, I try to move to that 301 wherever I can. I try to move myself into that area because we start to get to, everybody wants to try to promote Deshaun Watson like he's going to bounce back, and Bryce Young like he's going to continue to ascend, and Will Levis. And there's chances could happen, right? But I want a draft where every single one that I've come out with 2 of the following of Kyler Murray, Justin Herbert. They keep to be in deals. Brock Purdy and Dak Prescott. I just keep pairing them up. I don't want to leave any of my startup drafts without having 2 of these guys. And I want to be able to make those trades where I'm not giving up my 25 first, but like I'll give you something in that 7 to 10 range. So I'll give you my 7th and a mid third to move myself up to that early second or something like that area where I can get Love, where I can get Murray, where I can get Richardson and just try to play off the board there a little bit. So how do you go about, I know in the past I've been like, yeah, sell your 25 first and get up there. I hate that. Next year's class is going to be running back loaded. There's a lot of, quality prospects where everyone's like, oh, it doesn't have Caleb Williams, but man, I mean, Ollie Gordon and Judkins and Burden. I mean, it's going to be another really good class. I tend to just, in the past, and I know you've seen the evolution of how I draft and things where I used to just trade all my picks. Just get them out of here. I don't want them. I'm going to move up. I want the asset. Now I'm like, I want that insulation. That 25 first, what's that worth to you where we're talking random 25 first? What pick are you selling? Last year when we did this pod, and it was 100 episodes ago today, we were doing that. Yeah, I just looked it up. We were saying it was going for a 5th rounder. And if you drafted that 24 first, almost every single pick is worth in that range unless you took Quentin Johnston. Like they're all up into that area. So what are you trading a random 25 first for, the people that ask? And what is the risk of doing that? Because a lot of people just throw them out there before they even make a draft pick. I love those guys because I'm cashing in. Give me your 25 first. You don't even know what your team looks like. Could be the 101.
Yeah, and even more so if you did that last year, let's say you traded away your 5th round pick for a 25 first. If you look at where those guys are going this year, right? We got Caleb going in the 1st, we got Marvin going in the 2nd, and then we have all of the rest of the top 8 going in the top 4 rounds. So if you got any of those top 8, you get a huge value increase. And then even you look at like Worthy, McConkey, Thomas, and Jonathan Brooks are all going in the 6th round. So worst case scenario, you basically move back around, which is negligible, as we're going to talk about when we get to the 5th round. Best case scenario, you doubled or tripled your value moving up. So this year, I mean, I am not trading my first. Unless you give me a 3rd round startup pick, right? Like I am just not trading my first, especially early on in the draft, because it takes away all your flexibility. That's where you get into a position where you're like, oh, I don't want to take Saquon over JJ McCarthy, or I don't want to take Jared Goff over JJ McCarthy, but I traded my first. I got to compete this year, blah, 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 blah. You don't want to get yourself, right? Like there's a reason why you trade back. It's also so you get more time to see how the board develops, see what your team could potentially look like. You want to delay any decisions that puts a stake in the ground one way or the other as long as possible. So I am not trading my 25 first, basically no matter what. On the other hand, I'm trading for them early in the draft. I don't like giving up a 5th or 6th rounder straight up for it. I would give up a 6 straight up for a 25 first pretty much no matter what. I prefer to do it moving backwards, like you said. So moving backwards in the 1st, going from the 2nd to 3rd and picking up a 1st rounder, going from the 5th to the 7th, something like that, and getting a 1st rounder is massive. I prefer to go about it that way.
Yeah, and you got to, the earlier you do it, the more the return is going to be. If you do it in the 1st round to move into the 2nd round, then when you go to the 2nd round, it's almost from the 2nd to the 4th. I always look at then the 3rd to the 5th. Like that's that kind of area, 4th to the 6th. Once you get to the 5th round, nobody's paying up. If they are, what I've been trying to do, and a lot of people are like, oh, I'll sell my 25 first for a 5th. I'm trying to get an 11th or a 12th rounder into that area where you not only, we talk about insulation all the time, but now instead of just a first for that 5th, now I have a first and an 11th rounder, which, isn't a sexy pick, but you end up throwing out there and you get a running back that could pop off, a running back, a secondary running back that's going to give you more value. Now you have 2 chances to win in that kind of scenario and try to move yourself back. What areas of the draft, and when we talk straight player evaluation, you and I could talk for days, but I want to talk strategy here. Is what area of the draft are you starting to say, you know what, this is a really flat tier and I'm trying to move back wherever I can? I mean, we talked about the first round, the second round, I think 201 through 206. I mean, you talk about 201 right now in a lot of drafts, which still just blows my mind. I don't understand it, but it's Justin Herbert's fallen to there all the time right now. And, you've seen firsthand, everyone's like, oh, Jim Harbaugh is going to come in and make them run every down. I mean, that's not what's going to happen. He's still an elite guy. But then you look, Amon-Ra St. Brown at 202 it's phenomenal value because you're getting similar type production from the big 3 dropping off. Marvin seems to be going up into that early second. Jordan Love, Breece Hall, Bijan Robinson. And then even the rest of the round 2, I mean, Puka, Wilson, Gibbs, A.J. Brown, Neighbors, Purdy. I feel like it starts to drop a little bit value after 18. Yep. And then 19 through 24 are still all phenomenal players, but there's a value drop from Breece Hall to Puka, into when we get into that area.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends. I think the top, to me, I would say I really want that quarterback. So to me, it's almost getting up into the top 16, I'd say, because I really want to get Kyler or Herbert there. I actually moved to the 204 in my most recent startup with the intention to do that. And all of the top quarterbacks were gone. All of the top 10 quarterbacks were gone at that point. I was stuck between choosing Bijan or Jordan Love. So it's not a terrible situation to be in. But that's kind of how I view that top half of the second round. The rest of the second round I see is pretty flat until you get to the end of the second, and then you're stuck with guys like, Tyreek Hill's going there, Jane Daniels, I don't want to chance on. I don't want to draft Sam Laporta there because you can get just as good of a player round and a half later. So it's kind of at that 2-3 turn where I find myself reaching a little bit on a guy like Purdy, a guy like Dak. I think the wide receivers flatten out a little bit once you get to like Neighbors, Olave, Wilson, like London. To me, it's a little bit simpler. So again, I'm okay trading to that range. I'm just probably going to trade back again or take one of the quarterbacks, either Dak or Purdy at that point. But I do see a little bit of flattening between the late second and early third, all the way up until really like after the QBs go with Dak and Purdy, the late third all the way through kind of the mid fourth to me is a tier, although I obviously disagree with some of the ADPs, but you're looking at kind of the early on of that wide receiver morass of the London, Ayuk, Waddle, Dunze, and you're getting into the next round of tight ends with McBride, Kincaid, Bowers. You're kind of looking at a similar area there. Yeah,
all the tight ends go there. You start to see Tyreek Hill go off the board, Brandon Ayuk, Drake May. Then people start, for me, I'm not investing in running backs other than the big 3 until we get way down there. But Jonathan Taylor and ETN start to go in there. The biggest one that I want to talk about, and I want to get your mentality here, because, there was a guy that I was talking to today, and he goes, hey, who would you take here in this round? And I said, well, I mean, I would clearly take Malik Neighbors at this point. I would, kind of consider I would take Brock Purdy. I would take Dak Prescott. He's like, Christian McCaffrey's still there. I'm going to jump in on them. So we have never seen a running back at this age, still his ADP on Keep Trade Cut is still it's in the second round, and I've been seeing him go in the third round. I keep telling people, it's like, this is that area where let somebody else take Christian McCaffrey. As sexy as Christian McCaffrey is, as many points as he's going to put up for you, this asset can only go down. Like we're in an area where 2 years ago we were talking about Christian McCaffrey because of the injuries. We were like outside the top 3 rounds. Now he had another season. He was phenomenal. But what are the pitfalls of taking guys like that? Taking Tyreek Hill in the third round, taking Christian McCaffrey in the third round. I try to avoid that as much as I can, because if I want a Devontae Adams in the 7th round, if I want Saquon Barkley in the 7th round, if I want Josh Jacobs in the 8th, like I'd rather have the production that way with less volatility.
Yeah, me too. It's just you're investing in a depreciating asset, right? You're buying a boat, you're not buying a house. And that just it's difficult at that point to be able to gain any value of it. So you need to produce year one. And like I've said, it locks you into that strategy. So yes, there's so Christian McCaffrey, I mean, the ADP I'm looking at, he's going at the 205. I'm sure it varies in different places. I personally have Christian McCaffrey at my God, how long can I scroll down? I have him at my pick number 33, and he's going at pick 17. So, like, as you can tell, I don't want to invest in a depreciating asset like that in a startup. Like, I have guys going over Christian McCaffrey. I got JJ McCarthy over him. I got Dak Prescott over him. I got Sam Laporta, Trey McBride. These are guys who can give me, I mean, maybe not McCarthy, but other than him, give me elite production from year one. And they have a 5 to literally 10-year window for a guy like McBride or Laporta to give me value. And if they tear their ACL, they're going to be worth the exact same 9 months after, right? If Christian McCaffrey tears his ACL, it's like we were talking before this about redraft leagues. Like you're basically playing redraft at that point, and your team just got destroyed. So there are scenarios, right? I don't see it happening. I don't think I've taken Christian McCaffrey in a startup since like 2019, but there are scenarios. If I third round reversal, if I started Mahomes, AJ Brown, and then McCaffrey fell to the end of the third, sure. At that point, I'm fine going on a 2-year window, right? Like, as I said, be flexible, adjust to how the draft lays out. But in general, I got no interest in a guy like McCaffrey at that point because, like you said, you can make investments later in the draft at a cheaper cost, where if Saquon tears his ACL, sucks. You lost round 7 value, but CMC's value is double that. That's just, it's too risky for me.
Yeah, I love that you said it exactly how I've been saying is I have him as number 28, which is in that similar area. But it's like if I take Sam Laporta instead of him, if I do, take Trey McBride, if I take Malik Neighbors, the difference being, and just like I talked about with Justin Jefferson, is startups are different than dynasty trades. Like people don't always get that. If I have the 104 in a rookie draft and I am an absolute alpha team that there's Christian McCaffrey puts me over the top and I make a trade for 104 for Christian McCaffrey, I'm okay doing that because my team's already built. I built the longevity of my wide receivers. What I always try to do is I try to have 3 young alpha wide receivers. You know what I mean? Those foundational guys. I'll have Amon-Ra St. Brown and I'll have Marvin Harrison Jr. and Garrett Wilson. Okay, now Christian McCaffrey doesn't change the makeup of my team. He just makes it better for that time being, and this is one of those things where I keep saying I will not draft a running back unless it's an absolute value. Like I'm not going to go ahead and move Breece Hall above Amon-Ra St. Brown because I'm going to get more longevity from those wide receivers. If I, was in a team where I could trade, there's a possibility where if I needed it, I could trade Amon-Ra straight up for Breece Hall if I was going to go win a championship. But you don't do that in May. As a running backs, we do that when you're starting to push towards the title shot. You know what I mean? So that's one thing that I'm just really hesitant. Everybody shares their roster and they're like, Dad, look at this. Nobody's beating me year one until they do. Right. And then you get into the purgatory of like, I don't have my 25 first. I have Travis Kelce, Tyreek Hill, Devontae Adams. Like, what am I doing with the rest of this team? And it's hard to talk people out of that because we get into that point scoring season where, yes, I would rather have this player. Make sure I load up on those young guys. So I'm with you too. I mean, that third round is just, it's kind of a flat tier. If you're moving out of that area.
And one more point just on McCaffrey. If you're drafting him in the second round, depending where you pick in the second round. So let's say his ADP right now, which is 205. I have it estimated, and I'm working on the system for my startup draft guide, where the 205 should be worth 18% of your team's total value. So what you're saying is you're putting 18% of your team's total value leaving the draft into a 28-year-old running back with 2 major injuries. Like, again, you're driving the car off the lot. If he doesn't do well, you are instantly going to be probably the least valuable team in your league.
Yeah, no, I love that. That's something that I love how you tied it in more to an analytical thing where you can see those percentages because everybody seems to just say, well, think about what he's going to do for me year one. I win year one, then I'm paid for the next 10 years. Okay, but if you didn't,
Yeah.
Now you're going to be paying in and donating for the next 10 years.
And even if you're a 1 seed, you only have a 34% chance of winning your league with a typical playoff format. And that if you're a dominant 1 seed. If something goes wrong with your scheduling and you end up being a 3 seed, you only have an 11% chance of winning the title that year. So again, no matter how dominant you think you might be, it's not as dominant as you might think.
That's always good content. When you're talking about moving in, I mean, what are the areas when you're talking about wide receivers? Like how many wide receivers are you looking to get before round X? For me, I'm trying to get 3 stud wide receivers before we get to round 5, round 6. Yeah. A lot of people just say, oh, that's too rigid for me. But I'm always, like I said, right now, rounds 1 through 4, I want an alpha wide receiver, maybe 2. I want my quarterbacks. If the tight ends fall, and for me, I mean, there's 4 guys that, again, we worked on foundational, but I mean, if I can get Bowers, Laporta, Kincaid, or McBride in there, I'm okay with that. If not, I'll wait a little bit for Andrews, Hawkinson, Pitts. I think they'll move their way up there. But when it comes to wide receivers, and I think you and I both look at it the same way, is we want to get those alpha wide receivers early in the draft. What kind of area are you trying to move into? How many picks do you want? How many wide receivers? Do you ever look at that before you get started?
Yeah, I do a fair amount. I mean, I think the wide receivers are in a very interesting position where after we have the big 3 in Amon Ra, I don't have Harrison near there, but then we have the tier where, it's the real, like you talk foundational. These are the real elite studs, in my opinion, going from Harrison all the way down to wide receiver, essentially 12 or 13 with London or Ayuk. And then you get to the range where some of these guys are wide receiver 2s on their own team. You can project them for 16-ish points a game, Devontae Smith, Michael Pittman, DK Metcalf, but they're not going to be that elite level. So I actually tend to make sure I get at least one of the second tier wide receivers. So talking, Puka, Harrison, AJ Brown, Garrett Wilson, because, usually I'm not taking a first tier wide receiver because I'm going quarterback at that point. After that, I let the board play out to me. Like you said, I usually do take one of those top 4 ends. So I'll take a guy like Trey McBride over a guy like Jalen Waddle or Brandon Ayuk, because I just think that the positional scarcity, especially in a half tight end premium league, but even in a non-tight end premium league, the positional scarcity there is just more important. While I can argue that a guy like, DJ Moore or T. Higgins, who's going 2.5 rounds after Brandon Ayuk, above him. So, and I don't see that happening with Trey McBride versus George Kittle or TJ Hawkinson. So it is a matter of like positional scarcity at that level, but I certainly do like to load up on wide receivers. I tend to hammer them a lot in that like 5th and 6th round range, and I just take whoever's left at the bottom of the tier. So if you see, Nico Collins falling to the mid to late 5th, right? If you see T. Higgins, he's been slipping to the 6th. I'm happy to do that. And then I love the wideouts, some of the wideouts in this draft, the Worthy and Thomas and McConkey's who are going in the 7th. I know I'm not going to be interested in Isaiah Pacheco or James Cook or DeAndre Swift, God forbid, in the 7th round. I just saw that. Oh my God. So I'm not interested in that. So I'm a go wide receiver there. So I do tend to prioritize getting a tight end up in that early range. And because I often go, quarterback round 1, wide receiver round 2, quarterback round 3, tight end round 4, sometimes I am entering round 5, 6, 7 with only 1 or 2 wideouts. And I'm generally okay with that.
That's something that over the years, like I said, rounds 5 through 7 for me are the wide receiver hot zone. 2 years ago, you were getting Devonta Smith, Amon-Ra, St. Brown, Brandon Ayuk. And last year, you were getting Drake London. You're getting these guys that could ascend in value. And this year, there's a lot of those guys that fall into that area where in round 4, I keep hammering the drum. I'm like, why would you want Brandon Ayuk over Trey McBride? There's no reason. Like, as much as I love Brandon Ayuk, why would you want Nico Collins over Dalton Kincaid? Like, it doesn't make sense because of the positional scarcity. After tight end 7, I have 7 guys who I would say are foundational. Then we're talking about, okay, you got to take Ingram, you got to take Kittle, you got to take Kelsey, and they serve their purpose too. But give me those young elite tight ends. There's only 4 of them. Maybe Pitts, if we get into that area, so there would be 5. We got to get ourselves into that area. You don't want your tight end coming in year 1 at 32 years old. You know what I mean? We're not trying to get that unless we're talking about investing later. I love that you talked about rounds 5 through 7. I mean, these are the wide receivers where, DJ Moore, Devonta Smith, Rome Odunze, Jalen Waddle, Nico Collins, Zay Flowers, DK Metcalf, T. Higgins. It's littered in this area. Pittman, Jackson Smith and Digba, Jordan Addison, Tank Dell, Lad McConkey, Brian Thomas, George Pickens, Xavier Worthy. I mean, this is what you want. You want these guys instead of taking a running back here, like you said. If you take Isaiah Pacheco in the 7th instead of Xavier Worthy, then in the 9th, you could get Rashad White, but you could get Devontae Adams in the 9th instead of Rashad White. So now you have an area where you're getting multiple areas where you're covering the running back position. For me, 8 through 10. If I need to fill out my roster and it works right, I'm not going to go ahead and jump and take Joe Mixon over, wide receivers in that area like Keon Coleman or some of the quarterbacks. But it's a matter of 8 through 10. If you're going to start filling out that roster, I'm fine going in there for Jonathan Brooks, Trey Benson, those kind of guys to start filling out my roster.
Yeah, and if we look at the 8 to 10th, again, just looking at my sheet here, a late 8th round pick should only be worth about 3% of your dynasty team. So at that point, again, I'm okay taking Alvin Kamara in the late 8th, knowing that he's going to die on my roster because it's only 3 or 4% of my dynasty team. That's totally fine. But it's a totally different thing taking Isaiah Pacheco in the 6th when I could have had George Pickens or Jackson Smith-Njigba, who could easily do what Drake London has done, where Drake London had a identical, maybe slightly worse second year to his first year and ended up jumping up 3 rounds in startup value. Pickens and JSN could do the same thing this year. There's no scenario that Isaiah Pacheco is going as a 3rd round running back, as the RB4 next year or RB5 next year. Like, that's just not going to happen. So you have to weigh the production versus the potential value upside. And like I said, I'm always looking to increase value in these drafts. So wide receivers in that range is the way to do it.
Yeah, and for me, another principle we always push is reduce volatility. So if I take Garrett Wilson in the 2nd instead of Jahmyr Gibbs, and then we get to round 9 where I can go ahead and take Joe Mixon instead of Ricky Purcell. That's your flip flop. Now, Joe Mixon's going to give you production year 1. Garrett Wilson's got longevity. I'm always trying to make sure I load up on those wide receivers. Last year we talked a lot about rounds, 11 through 15. And a lot of people, they go in there and they start taking, I want to get Josh Downs. I want to get Romeo Dobbs. I want Jahan Dotson. I want to start getting some of these wide receivers, Jermaine Burton, Javon Baker, Malachi Corley. These are the guys that go in that range. How do you go about rounds like 11 through 15? I know last year we were talking about, in that area, I got the choice of, I can get Chase Brown. I can get Jalen Wright. I can start filling in with some of these running backs who are an injury away. Yeah. I personally look at it as like, you know what? The path to relevance for one of these guys, the path to relevance for a Kendre Miller in comparison to Jerry Jeudy, who I can't believe they're going in the same area. You know what I mean? Or even a guy like, who else do we have in that area? We have Marshawn Lloyd in comparison to Cortland Sutton. How do you go about rounds 11 through 15? I don't draft a lot in there. I'm always just trying to add running backs because I feel like I can flip them. But how do you handle rounds 11 through 15?
First of all, I'm glad you brought up Jeudy versus Miller because I went to go check my rankings. I have them 47 spots apart. So I definitely agree
ADP is like right next to each other right now. It's just like it makes no sense.
Jerry Jeudy in the 12th round, I couldn't be me. But anyways, I mean, you mentioned Josh Downs. Love taking him. I love him as a player. But what you're getting at and what I'd really want to hone in on how you the early double-digit rounds. I want to take someone who I think either could be starting on my team, but really more importantly, that I could flip for a 1st round pick in October, right? So I look at, all right, what's the path for a guy like Jerry Jeudy or Jahan Dotson to be worth a 1st round pick in October? There's just no way. It's not going to happen. Even if Jahan Dotson goes and puts up 15, 16 points a game for the first month of the season, he's not going to be worth a 1st round pick, right? Because wide receivers, unless you're the elite of the elite or have a production profile of a year plus, aren't going to be worth that. But like you said, whether it's the quarterbacks with upside like a Justin Fields or a Michael Penix, or it's a running back who are an injury away like a Blake Corum, like a Kendre Miller, I like taking a guy like Ben Sinnott in that range, who could easily ascend to be, a top 10 tight end. I think I already have him at tight end 11. So
I have him 12. Yeah, it's like he's already there. Yeah,
exactly, and definitely one of my targets. So for me, speaking of this draft specifically, I've talked about in the rookie drafts, after 207, there's a huge gap. And one of my favorite stats that I have for my own personal rookie drafts is I've taken picks at the 207 or the 206 31 times, and I've only drafted at the 203 6 times because I'm trying to get to the end of that rookie tier and get those guys who drop. And for me, the ending of that tier, it's Adonai Mitchell, it's Xavier Legette, it's Ricky Pearsall, right? If you can get one of those 3 guys, I'm going for them. But after that, you're really getting to the roster clogging wide receivers, right? After Deontay Johnson, maybe who can contribute a little bit. The Romeo Dobbs, the Jerry Judys, the Troy Franklins, the Jameson Williams, the odds of those guys hitting are so low. The odds of those guys really making an impact for your team is so low. And the odds of them getting to be worth the top 5 round startup pick is basically 0. So if I have the option of a Justin Fields, for instance, or one of those guys, most people are like, I can't put Justin Fields in my starting lineup. I'm trying to fill out a lineup here. That's not the way I'm thinking at this point.
Fields and Penix, and again, the difference of looking at a smash accept draft versus, some of the ones that people are... They hear what I'm saying all the time. So Fields went in round 9 and Penix went in round 8. So they kind of jumped the gun. I think both of those guys you hit on, and I'm glad you did, because they will be worth a first rounder this year at some point or next year. You know what I mean? Like, there is the path for Michael Penix, whatever narrative you want to say, the day he starts, the day Justin Fields starts, they are instantly doubled the value they are right now, as opposed to where you take Justin Fields, he's going in the same area as Aaron Jones, Christian Watson, Christian Kirk, I like Christian Watson, I like Christian Kirk, and I like Aaron Jones, but if Justin Fields starts, he's worth arguably more than 2 of those 3, if not, you know what I mean? So he ascends up there. Same with Michael Penix and the offenses he's at.
And I'd make the same point on some of these roster clogging tight ends who, even though like Dallas Goedert and Dalton Schultz and Cole Kmet and Pat Freiermuth, like these guys are like borderline starting tight ends, but they have no value on the trade market, right? Because every team that's contending has an elite tight end, or they can get.
They don't want the tight end 14.
Exactly, right? Like they're going to go out and get like Evan Ingram or Travis Kelce, who aren't that expensive. So a guy like Dallas Goedert is basically impossible to trade, right? So then you're drafting a guy who has no value upside, who has no trade liquidity, and like is going to put up 10 points for you. Sure, like that's useful. If you haven't drafted a tight end to that point, I get it. But first of all, you probably should have. But second of all, there's just so much more value upside in play where you draft a guy like Justin Fields or even a guy like Christian Watson, who you then could ascend, and you can trade him straight up for TJ Hawkinson in October, right?
The next part I want to talk about, and this has been fun. I love just picking your brain. Rounds like 16 to 25. Yeah, this is a good time. 16 to like 25. A lot of people they're trying to take their home run cuts at this point, right?
Yeah.
But you and I have already invested. We already have 2 quarterbacks and 3 wide receivers who are studs. And when people are out here drafting Jacob Cowing and Malik Washington and Jalen Hyatt, I'm taking Ty Chandlers of the world and Elijah Mitchell and guys that are going to, you know what? What are the chances you can flip Jalen Hyatt for a second in season? 0.
No.
It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
What are the chances you can flip Ty Chandler? Aaron Jones goes down, which will probably happen. Someone needs a running back. All of a sudden, your 18th rounder, and I have not left a draft without Ty Chandler because Aaron Jones is made of paper mache. But like, it's a guy that you flip instantly for a second, but you're not going to get that for Malik Washington. You're not going to get that for Elijah Moore, who's just a clogger. Brendan Rice, Jonathan Mingo. Like, when you start taking those wide receivers in that deep area, it's a matter of, I would rather have, and I did this last year, and I think when you were on the pod, we talked about it. I was taking Gardner Minshew's. I was taking, guys that were backups. Did they pan out? Not every single one of them, but there was a time period where you could flip Gardner Minshew for a second. There will be a time period where this year you can flip Joe Flacco because Anthony Richardson will probably get hurt. There's a time where,
Sam Howell.
Yeah, for sure. That's the next guy was in there. Sam Howell, I think right now he's been going around 14, same area as Marvin Mims, Jacoby Myers.
It's crazy.
Sam Howell could be a starter by, Geno Smith was, you and I both liked him 2 years ago. He played phenomenal football. Last year, it was bad. Sam Howell was traded there for a reason, for Seattle to have an opportunity to have a quarterback. They knew Washington was going with Jaden Daniels. Now you have, Sam Howell's one of the most, if not the most, priority backup.
he could be a 24-year-old starting quarterback with 5+ point per game rushing upside, throwing a DK Metcalf, Jackson Smith-Njigba, and Tyler Lockett with two like good running backs. Like incredible value. But back to what you were getting at, it's just avoiding the roster cloggers. I completely agree. And one of the ways to think about it is in the early rounds, you should already be thinking about who you might be taking in these mid to late teens, right? So if I know that I'm going to be taking Ty Chandler or, Bucky Irving or J.K. Dobbins instead of a Marvin Mims or a Jalen McMillan, that might change my approach in the, late single digit rounds like we were talking about, where you then can go ahead and take George Pickens over Jonathan Brooks, or you can take Jaden Reed over DeAndre Swift. So it's a whole strategy that comes together. And I think loading the back end of your rosters, not with these home run shot wide receivers, because you might think it's a home run, but you're probably just going to foul it off at best, maybe hit a single, right? How you're really going to hit a home run is by taking a Sam Howell or Michael Mayer or Tucker Kraft, and they win the starting job. And now not that Michael Mayer's going to win the starting job, but you know what I'm saying? And all of a sudden, or a backup running back, a guy like Keaton Mitchell with all this upside, or Ty Chandler, and then you can flip him in season for a second round pick. And that's how, again, back to the whole purpose of this, we're trying to accrue max value for your team. It's a malleable object, especially here in May, in June. It doesn't really matter, even in September, in my opinion, once you get past the top 14, 15 guys on your roster. So don't care about who you're going to play in the week 8 by NATO when you have 3 injuries. There's so much time to figure that out. Worry about you get to the week 8 by NATO, you have Ty Chandler with an Aaron Jones injury. Go flip Ty Chandler for, Christian Kirk, who's struggling a little bit, and that's how you solve your problem.
Yeah, and it doesn't even matter if you're win now or you're rebuilding.
No,
you want to take some of those assets where, you take Ty Chandler, like you said, let's say Christian Kirk goes down to injury. You could flip that easily. You could take a guy that's out, and I want to look at like last couple startups I've done. And this isn't, we practice what we preach. Smash 13 through 15. All of them I have Justin Herbert, Dak Prescott, Brock Purdy, Kyler Murray. Those are all my quarterbacks. I'm loaded up at wide receiver. My bench, I got guys like Josh Dobbs, Trey Lance, Mike White, and then 8 to 10 running backs, the Algiers, Gainwells, Fords, Chandlers, all those kind of guys. And then I have a couple of guys where I would say that's a sprinkling, where it's like I have like Khalil Shakir and a couple late wide receivers. Dontavian Wicks is another guy I like taking in the teens, where I would rather take 2 shots on them and then not draft another one. Rounds 15 through 25, I rarely draft a wide receiver unless it's real obvious.
Oh, yeah. I mean, especially after you get past like 18, 19, like some of these guys, we're talking Devontae Walker, Malik Washington, Jonathan Mingo. Like these are cut candidates. Like these guys aren't getting drafted in rookie drafts, and neither are the running backs are in that range, but there's just such a more logical, like it's the same reason why in the 4th round of a rookie draft, I'm taking Tyrone Tracy and Ray Davis over Devontae Walker and Malik Washington, just because the path to production and dynasty value is so much more clear.
Yep. You can flip those running backs every time, and I think there's a certain point you want to stop taking those high upside, because there aren't high upside when you're like, you know what, I'm going to invest in this wide receiver because Treylon Burks is going to bounce back. Nope, it's not happening. I'm sorry. As much as I like the prospect when he came out, we're past that area, and even if he does pop off like Jerry Jeudy, if either of those guys have 1,000-yard season, are they worth a first? No. Are they worth a second? They don't move up too much for me. You know what I mean? Right. So I love talking shop on this. You and I were vibing so much, I skipped all the comments. They were like flying in back and forth. But again, tell everybody where they can find you. This is always, one of my favorite times where you and I get to chop it up and kind of go over some things, because we're both busy in this space doing things. So give an opportunity where, let everybody know what you're working on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I got to have you back on my podcast sometime soon as well. At Dynasty Zoltan FF on Twitter, Dynasty Zoltan Podcast, DynastyZoltan.com. Kept it pretty simple for y'all. That's where you can find all my work.
Love it. Guys, make sure you guys check out all the startup content. There's every single opportunity. Every single draft pattern that I have is in the Patreon. Make sure you guys check those out. The other thing is we do have draft assistance on there. So in the top tier, we will help you with your draft. There has been countless guys that, I've been on vacation or I've been out with I'll give you my cell phone number. I'm going to help you with the draft. We're going to get it done. You're going to have some banging teams. One guy in there, he got 11 firsts by the time it was all said and done. And everybody's like, your team's going to be trash. Dude, if you look at his roster, everybody was making fun of him the whole draft. He was drafting it the Dynasty Dad way, the Zoltan way, moving back. Everybody's like, your team's trash. Dude, he won it in year 2. You just go out there and you bang it out. So thanks again for tuning in, guys, and enjoy the process. I actually enjoy doing that